All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're talking about Srivijaya. Now, you might not have heard that name as often as, say, Rome or the Persian Empire, but trust me, this was one of the most powerful maritime empires maybe ever.
Just think about that for a second. An empire built entirely on the sea. Their power wasn't about how much land they conquered. No, it was all about controlling the waves, the vital trade routes of ancient Asia. I mean, their highways were literally the ocean currents, and their biggest cities were these incredible, thriving ports.
So starting way back in the 7th century, right from its home base in Sumatra, Srivijaya basically owned the seas for centuries. It's an incredible story. So the big questions are, how did they pull it off? What was so special about how they ran things? And, what happened to them? Let's get into it.
Okay, first up, the story of Srivijaya is, well, it's a story of the sea, from beginning to end. Their whole identity was wrapped up in this idea of ruling the waves, and there's actually a pretty cool word for that.
It's called a thalassocracy. It's a totally different way of thinking about an empire. Forget conquering huge chunks of land. Srivijaya was all about controlling the flow of trade. Their real power came from their navy and their genius position as the gatekeeper for all that maritime commerce.
And their strategy? It was absolutely brilliant. They basically parked themselves right on top of the Strait of Malacca. Think of it as the main highway for all sea trade between India and China. By controlling that one critical choke point, they could tax everything that passed through. We're talking spices, gold, silk, you name it. And they had the naval muscle to back it up, protecting the trade routes and creating this whole network of allied ports that got rich right along with them. And we know this happened fast. I mean, this isn't just guesswork. By 671, a Chinese monk named Aitsing travels there and writes about this incredibly rich and well-run kingdom. Then, boom, just a little over 10 years later, we have an actual stone inscription, the Kedukan Bukit inscription, talking about its founder, a guy named Dapunta Yang, leading a massive military campaign. They quickly swallowed up their rivals. So yeah, this wasn't some slow, gradual rise. It was like an explosion. So that brings up a really interesting point. If you don't have borders, and you're not a typical land-based empire, how in the world do you govern it? Turns out, they had a system that's, well, it's pretty different from anything we'd recognize today.
I mean, really, how do you rule an empire that doesn't have any lines on a map?
They used something called the mandala system. The best way to picture it is not like a modern country, but more like a solar system. You've got the king at the center, he's the sun, and his power just radiates outward. Other smaller kingdoms and ports are like the planets, held in orbit not by strict rules and borders, but by loyalty, trade, and the threat of that powerful navy. And this is so different from how we think of a country today, right? We've got fixed borders, tons of bureaucracy. The mandala system was way more fluid. Loyalty was personal, you pledged it to the ruler, not some abstract state. That meant they could expand like crazy. But it was also a weakness. If a powerful king died, those loyalties could just evaporate. Power wasn't about owning every square inch of land, it was about controlling the places that mattered, the ports, the trade hubs.
But Srivijaya's power wasn't just about money and military. It was also a massive cultural and religious force. Remember that Chinese monk, Aitsing? Well, he didn't just write about their wealth. He described a place that was a spiritual powerhouse, a huge center for Buddhist learning that was on par with the great monasteries in India itself.
This place became a beacon for Mahayana Buddhism. We're talking rulers sponsoring huge monasteries, not just in their own territory, but all the way over in India at the legendary University of Nalanda. If you were a Buddhist scholar back then, Srivijaya was a must-visit destination. And you can still see that legacy today, literally carved into the stone of incredible temple complexes like Muara Tokus.
But, as we know, no empire lasts forever. So what happened? How does a naval superpower like this just disappear?
Well, the thing is, there wasn't one big dramatic moment. No giant battle that ended it all. It was more like a death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, grinding decline that took centuries. It started around 1025. The Chola Empire from India launched these massive naval raids that really shook Srivijaya's control of the seas. Then, over the next couple of centuries, new rivals popped up, especially in Java, like the Singhasari and Majapahit empires. On top of all that, trade routes started changing. Srivijaya's whole business model started to crumble. By about 1400, it was all over. The empire just faded away. And what's crazy is that for hundreds of years, Srivijaya was basically lost to history, a complete ghost. So, how do we even know about it now? Well, it's a story that had to be pieced back together, bit by painstaking bit. Yeah, think of modern historians and archaeologists as detectives. They've had to dig through these tiny, scattered clues left behind in different countries from different time periods, all to bring the story of this lost world back to light. And this is basically how they do it. You've got these incredible stone inscriptions called prasasti. Those are like the official records. They give you names, dates, what the kings were up to. Then you have accounts from foreigners, like those Chinese monks and traders who give you the juicy details about what life was actually like. And of course, there's archaeology, digging up the actual temples and artifacts that prove these people were really there. So, at the end of the day, why should we care about this lost empire? Because Srivijaya teaches us so much about a different way of wielding power. This was a masterclass in maritime control. Way before anyone was talking about global supply chains, they proved that controlling one little strait could be more powerful than owning a continent. They were a huge force in spreading culture and religion, and maybe most importantly, their story is just this amazing reminder that the greatest empires aren't always written on land. Sometimes they're written on water. Putting the story of Srivijaya back together was this incredible piece of historical detective work. And it really makes you think, right? What other amazing histories, what other powerful sea-based worlds are still out there, just waiting for someone to find the clues and tell their story?